The 13th Warrior, directed by John McTiernan, is considered one of the most powerful box office failures of the 90s. The box office fiasco hit McTiernan hard, and some quality projects were no longer offered to the director who had once given us Predator and Die Hard. Because of this, in the early noughties, he got into Rollerball, after which his career was basically over. In 1996, when production started on the movie Eaters of the Dead, no one had the slightest idea of failure. At the helm was an experienced director who had several big box office hits. The main star was Antonio Banderas, who at that time was in high demand. Another bonus was writer Michael Crichton, whose novel Eaters of the Dead was the basis for the plot. Crichton was much loved in Hollywood because adaptations of his novels often became box office hits. Jurassic Park, Twister, Disclosure, Westworld are all his work. It was this bonus, as many believe, that greatly influenced the failure of the picture. Because of his fame and connections in the Hollywood highs, Crichton was originally assigned to the film as producer and screenwriter, has very large opportunities for creative control, which he constantly used, prying into the shooting process and advising director John McTiernan how best to shoot. Many scenes of the film were shot the way Crichton wanted them to be. All this eventually led to the fact that the first test viewing of the finished material turned out to be a disaster. The studio sent the picture to the editing table, after which another test group was assembled. The result was similar. The audience was very bored and could not understand anything. Since no one cared about the opinion of director John McTiernan, he fulfilled all his obligations under the contract, quarreled with Crichton and the studio one final time, and slammed the door. After that, Disney sent the film to the studio for additional filming. The title of the film was hastily changed from Eaters to The 13th Warrior. The first thing Crichton did as director was to reject the music of composer Graeme Revell. His work can be followed in the films The Crow, Pitch Black. Crichton decided that the music roared too gloomy and the picture needed a more pompous soundtrack. Jerry Goldsmith, known from The Mummy and Total Recall, was brought in to write it. Crichton completely rewrote the end of the film. He also replaced Susan Willis, who played Wendell's mother, with a younger actress, because he thought that the murder of the old woman would have a bad influence on the main characters, which he did not want. Thanks to all this work, the film's budget rose from $85 million to $115 million. Some sources claim a budget of $60 million, but the producers of the film, interviewed several years after the premiere, said that the shooting did not inflate the budget to the touted heights. Ned Dowd asserts that the production budget for The 13th Warrior, $90 million. Plus, $70 million went to marketing, which is not usually attributed to the production budget. But in the case of the movie The 13th Warrior, for some reason, it does not stand out as a separate item. With such figures, the failure of the film certainly looks less epic, and its presence among the most flawed pictures in Hollywood history looks doubtful. In cinemas, the movie hit 2 years after the studios presented the first version of the editing. At the world box office, the film grossed $62 million. $33 million came from American theaters and another $29 from the rest of the world. On a budget of $90 million, it all looks sad, but not as disastrous as on a budget of $160 million. Watching the film, no one gets the feeling that $160 million was spent on the film. Actor Omar Sharif was so shocked by the final version of the film that he turned down any job offer for 4 years. He says that he signed up for the film directed by John McTiernan, not the one that ended up in theaters. The beginning of the film, which features Omar Sharif, was severely cut during post-production. Disney tried to minimize the losses. The props were scattered around the amusement parks. The Viking ship, for example, is in the Epcot Pavilion at the Walt Disney World Park in Orlando. Michael Crichton never sat in the director's chair again after 13 Warriors, even though he had done it 7 times before. Also, he was never given that kind of creative control again. Let no one be surprised by the studio's great faith in Crichton. Before the filming of 13 Warrior, the films Jurassic Park and Twister arrived in cinemas. And if in Jurassic Park Steven Spielberg would not allow himself to point out, then Crichton was very actively involved in Twister as a producer. Least of all from the failure of 13 Warrior, suffered the career of Antonio Banderas. He had a hard time after a couple of years, when in a row went flop his films, Original Sin, Femme Fatale, The Body and Ballistic. Thanks for watching, subscribe and stay tuned.